This podcast is part of the Pull Up a Chair podcast network. Let's build community through connection, conversation, and collaboration.
What does it mean to be happy? 'Cause it looks like we all don't know. Glass half full or empty. Man, we just putting on a show.
Welcome to How's That Working For You Season 2. It's your girls Kat and V, but this time we're taking deeper dives into mental health and breaking stigmas. So get ready because things are about to get real and personal. How's That Working For You is a passion project created with the intention of creating space and awareness around mental health topics that are often hard to talk about. We are not professionals in the field of mental health, but we speak from our own personal experience and thoroughly conduct our own research to help educate others on why it's important to join this conversation. Hey V, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to chat with you about all the shame that's associated with mental illness.
Gosh, I mean, that's like so many layers to unpack. So I guess we gotta get started, should we?
All the research done for this episode can be found on our website. You can find us on Instagram at How's That Working For You. Also, the link for everything will be found in the description of this podcast, as it will be for every podcast that comes down the road. So 1 in 4 Americans will suffer from a mental illness at some point in their life. 1 in 5 Americans are currently suffering with mental illness. Being that we are recording this in COVID, that number is probably a lot higher. With that being said, very few people actually take the time to talk about their mental illness and seek treatment. It's estimated that only 30% of people struggling from mental illness seek any sort of treatment or help. And the question really is, why is that? Why are we so embarrassed to talk about mental illness? And I think a lot of that has to stem from our culture. There's like 2 main categories associated with shame. There's external shame and internal shame. And of course, external shame is the culture, the people around you, your family, your friends, your spouse. For me, at least, internal shame is the harder of the 2 to break because that's you shaming yourself for it. Before we get any further into just the raw data of it, let's talk about our experiences with it. I know for me, when I was younger, coming from the background that I have, we never talked about mental health. And I think we definitely should have, because like I said, my mom is bipolar, my dad was dead, my grandmother was dying. There was a lot of grief and problems going on.
I would say so.
I was court ordered that I was sent to grief counseling when I was a kid, but I was bullied for it from my cousins, my siblings, oh, you're crazy.
Oh my God, your own family. Your own family.
Yeah, so I really internalized showing weakness and needing mental health help was a bad thing. It was a scary thing. If that was something that you were going through, there's something wrong with you. There's something broken with you. And I held on to that for years. I was in college when I first started to try to actually get some help because I was freaking crazy. I was losing my mind. I was having mental health breaks. I was going days on end without sleeping or drinking or brushing my teeth and thinking about death in an abstract way that I should not have been thinking about. It was bad. I was really, really...
You were a kid too.
Yeah, I was young and I needed help, and I didn't know that because I thought, oh, if you're going there, obviously you're schizophrenic. That's the only reason you would need to go get mental health help. But that was the culture. And I'm not saying that the whole world is like that, but I know a lot of it is. You don't see that depending on who you're following on Instagram, people talking about their struggles with their life. They only show you the absolute best moments. And so the fact that we're constantly seeing everybody at their best, but ourselves probably not living up to that, makes it hard. And if you are like me and you have shame associated to mental illness deeply ingrained with you, it makes it all the more difficult to get help.
Yeah.
What was your relationship with shame and mental illness?
It's a lot.
Yeah, you have a very different culture than I did growing up.
So my family was they're Vietnamese immigrants. So they came to America during the Vietnam War. So their view of mental health treatment was more they didn't believe in it.
Yeah.
They didn't really think it was going to be helpful, or they thought it was like doctors trying to take your money and like, you know, putting you on medication so that they can make money from you. It's not a real thing. Like that was kind of part of it too. My dad for the longest time didn't believe in therapy at all. When he started to believe in it, he tried it himself. It wasn't for him. I think that, you know, therapy isn't for everyone, but he did try it himself. And I think that just from the life that he lived, it was more of like, it was more like, just be tough. They went through all, like they were able to escape a war and come to America and lead a normal life. Why can't you just grow up? Like you have everything already. Why can't you why can't you live a normal life without psychological help or anything like that? Or like any type of, like, my mom was so ashamed of the fact that her kid was sick, crazy, sick, like that type of thing. So it wasn't more of like them outwardly shamingly the way that your family did by like diminishing your value at all. It was more like they were embarrassed for themselves and they didn't understand. They just didn't believe in the concept of that type of treatment, of that, like that branch of the medicinal field, right? Like that just didn't. So yeah, it was kind of hurtful because for me, I felt like, what's wrong with me then? Why can't I deal with this myself? Like why, you know, and there's no real answer to that question. Like the why of that.
There is an answer. It's called brain chemistry, and there is nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know what I meant. Like hypothetically, it's like there wasn't really like why. It was just the fact that I am what I am and I have what I have. It was the shame on top of that was just kind of, you know, it was just my family just not really believing it was a thing. Having a crazy kid was not in the cards. Like my mom was so, I think she really cared about appearances. She still does. She's very much like, she wants to be perfect. She had this perfect vision for her family and her kid to go to school and like do well and like be a doctor and be whatever, you know, like she wants to be better than everyone else. And when like I got diagnosed with what I have, she was like, oh shit, nobody can know. Yeah, nobody can know. It's a very different thing. I think that, I don't know, like we talked about this before. You and Ivy are so radically different. But we relate to each other in the ways that are important. Yeah.
And, you know, because of like experiences like yours or mine, a lot of people won't go out and actually get the help that they need because they have internal like shame, external shame, and it makes it harder for them to get the help that they needed. And if I think about what would have happened to me if I waited any longer than I already did, because I waited until there was like, the reason I went in to get mental help is one of my professors who cared a lot about me was like, hey, I'm going to give you an F in my class if you don't go, like, even if you do well in your assignments. And I really cared about my grades, like, a lot. So I actually went and I got help. And I lied to everybody in my life about where I was emotionally, where I was mentally. And if I didn't get the help at that time, I would have killed myself. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts. I know myself, I know my capabilities, and I know how easy it is for me to get sick and die. I would have ate something I was allergic to and waited in bed till death came. And I know that I would have. And it's like, it's embarrassing to say.
That would have been easy for you. You're allergic to literally everything. And
yeah, like
there's so many times where I'm just like hanging out with you and then like you start seizing and I'm like, oh my God, what? Is she okay? Like what's going on? It's very like just being your friend and hanging out with you. It's like, it's kind of like, it's scary. It's scary to, it's scary to see all the different things that could harm you. But yeah, moving on.
Yeah, like I know that would happen to me, and I know that happens to thousands of other people. Like that's awful. And you know, sometimes it's preventable, because with me, obviously it was preventable because I am still here and I am so much better as a person now. And like, it was so impactful for me that I ended up doing my senior thesis on my depression. My whole senior thesis was based off of that depressive episode that I had. And the extra hard thing was when I was doing the showcase, I had a lot of my aunts were coming. And honestly, I was shocked that any of my family members wanted to come and see my art gallery. Like, it honestly shocked me to my core that they cared to come and see it. And so when they did come to see it, and I had so many of them like, oh, I didn't know you were this depressed. It was like, really? Like, interesting. Like, not funny, but funny. And
No,
like,
yeah, that's funny. Like, that's yeah. It's sad and funny at the same time, but like, it's funny in the way that it's like your family. It's just, God, they're so incredibly, yeah, they're just very unaware of your well-being because they don't care about it.
yeah, and I know that my thesis was very impactful, and it did start a lot of very uncomfortable conversations. When you're in college and you're working on your senior thesis or capstone project, you're in like groups, and the groups have to talk about people. I've had several students when I was working my thesis have to leave the classroom because of how uncomfortable it made them feel. I did a series of mirrors where I overlaid images of rain and bricks. So when you looked into my piece, you saw how I felt with you standing in my place. And I had poetry talking about the way I would fantasize my next life, the way I was held down by the failures of myself as a person, and the confusion of how I could possibly go on knowing how worthless I was as a person was very heavy. And on top of that, I had mood music that I conducted myself to be playing in the room, and a small video clip of one of Banksy's pieces where the girl loses the balloon and it pops. Like, my thesis on paper didn't sound as harsh as it was in real life. Like, walking through my senior showcase was very difficult for everybody who went through it, because you literally saw yourself struggling the way I was struggling. And it started a real conversation, and I think, not just I think, but a lot of the research I showed is the only way to get people past the shame is to actually have these conversations. And I saw that with my thesis. I saw like my family for the first time in my whole life, and I was like 23 at the time, talk about mental health. Like, that wasn't a thing, and my family has experienced huge tragedies, and we never talked about mental health. And that was the first time I heard somebody bring up, wow, you actually needed therapy. Wow, you were actually struggling. It's like, yes, yes. And like, my mother has bipolar disorder. She was diagnosed at 16 with it. Like, it's not that we didn't know that it existed. It wasn't this foreign concept. It was just something we never talked about. And since then, I've had several conversations with several family members about the need for marriage therapy.
Yeah, so like, does anyone in your family use like real therapy anymore?
They are now.
They are now.
They do now, and I don't know if that would have happened. I know that a couple times some of them were sent to marriage counseling before almost getting divorced before this, but like, now people are actually working to get better. And I know, I'm not going to say all of it was because of my thesis, but it is because of the conversations that we had around it.
Yeah.
That it's not shameful to have mental health issues. It's just kind of normal.
It is normal. It's like, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's like normal, but it's like, it's an issue that should be addressed. Because to say that somebody with mental health issues is normal is also false, in my opinion. It's like, it's more like it's common. It's more common than not.
Exactly.
'Cause there are people, you know, and it's just like, there are people that we call them typical thinking people. Atypical is the other side. Is anybody with any type of, you know, neurological tic, like anxiety, depression, bipolar, you name it, any type of, you know, on the autism spectrum, anything like that. Like, that's atypical. But so there are people who are neurotypical, and the neurotypical people are the people that tend to think that therapy isn't a thing, or they tend to underestimate the power of mental health treatment is what I'm saying. Like my parents, I don't know, it's you can't really, because we're not doctors, we can't diagnose or say anything about really anything, but like I feel like my dad would be closer to the end of like neurotypical thinking. So when he tried therapy, it didn't really work for him, because said in past episodes is that like treatment is different for everybody. Everybody's experience with any type of mental health situation or condition is different. So my dad, while he might have had depression or something like that, therapy didn't work for him. And he kind of like was the type of person to grit his teeth and get through it. He escaped a war prison in Cambodia and made it here and started a family and all that stuff without the need for like treatment or anything like that. And he's fine, but that's him, right? And I think that with our generation, the way that it is, we have the privilege, most of us, some of us, not most of us, some of us, a select portion of us have the privilege to explore the option of mental health treatment. And I think that it's really, really important to eradicate the shame surrounded by it, so that more people who have the ability to seek mental health treatment will go do it. Because I remember for me, I almost exaggerated some of the symptoms that I was having so that I'd be able to be hospitalized. Thinking back on it, it's a little weird, but it's kind of weird that I exaggerated some of my symptoms. But sometimes people need to, like, I'm not the only one that's done this. I've talked to other people. We exaggerate our symptoms so that people will get it, will see it, and will realize that we need help. And so I would try to get myself hospitalized so that I would be able to explore the options. Like when I was like in a voluntary hold, I'd be under supervision of like doctors and nurses all around the clock to see how like new medications were affecting me and stuff like that. And when I was in the hospital, they were able to oversee a lot of that treatment that I was getting, and it didn't help right away. It's such a rocky road, especially with my particular journey. It was definitely not a straight road to recovery. So I was in and out of the hospital so many times that I'd have to sit down and really think about how many times I was in and out. But it was helpful. It was helpful because each time I was in the hospital, they'd give me something else, and it didn't always work, but at least they knew that it didn't work. You know, but when I say this, it's like, I don't want people to go out and try to get themselves hospitalized. Like, that's not my, that's not my purpose of saying that. My purpose is that sometimes if it gets to that point, like I was desperate. I was so sick, ill, like unwell. I think I talked about how I don't like the word sick, but I was so unwell that I was just desperate for something to help. So I wanted to try medications. I wanted to try whatever it is the doctors could throw at me so that it would get better. And the whole time, because my family didn't understand, I was alone in it. So it was just kind of I don't know. I feel almost a little iffy sharing it to this amount of depth, because I don't want people to see my journey as something that they should model theirs after or anything like that. Like,
oh, I completely understand. Like, I sat around until I was in my late teens, early 20s before I got help, and I should have been fixed long before I got to that point.
I mean, like, it's really hard to say because mental health is such a gray area. Nobody's treatment is going to be exactly the same ever.
Exactly.
Because it's just what we're trying to create here is a space, and we're trying to make room for people to at least explore that option.
Have the conversations, break those stigmas, and find out what happens and helps for them.
Yeah.
Because if you don't talk about the options, then you'll never know what options there are for you.
Yeah.
You can't get help like that.
Next week, I'll talk about how, like, the other side of it, like the more holistic treatments, like I found yoga and that helped me too. So we'll talk about that next week. But like right now, we're talking about like shame and how it prevented me from even trying, or it didn't prevent me because I was too stubborn. Like I was saying, I like got myself hospitalized. Like I was stubborn. I wanted help. So I guess for my side of it wasn't my own shame. It was my family shame for me, you know? Like it was,
Yeah.
like I wanted the treatment. I didn't really care at that point. I was so deep in it that I just wanted relief. So I tried to get it. And then there were times when I was actually ill to the point of like mania, it was such a hard journey for me because at any given point, I didn't know what was good for me, you know? It was just like, I knew when I was super depressed that I needed help and I'd get it. But then when it flipped over to the manic part where I wasn't depressed anymore, I thought I was okay and nobody would be able to help me. That was the hard part for me. So it was just, having bipolar disorder is, I'm lucky because it's not the worst it could be. Like, you know, I've heard of much worse disorders like BPD, which is often mistaken for bipolar disorder, but borderline personality disorder. That one's a real doozy. There were points when I was researching. See, that was me too. I would research I would research my disorder to learn more about it because that was how far into it. Like I wanted to get better, you know? So I would research just like in the dead of night what depression was, what caused depression, what medications would help depression, this and that. And that would, and then I'd bring that to my doctor. I'd be like,
You were that person.
I was that person. And, you know, they would listen to me and then they would disregard some other parts. But I was lucky enough that like one medication was the one that really sealed the deal for me. And that was when I started to get better. But it wasn't just that. It was like when I got better, I thought, oh, I'm fine now. I don't need this medication anymore. Then I stopped taking it and then it would start again. And it would just...
That cycle.
Yeah. So I know it kind of like we jumped off the topic of shame.
No, but see, like that's an important part of it. It's like just because you go for that first appointment to get help doesn't mean you're better. Like it's a mental health journey, not a mental health cure. And I know that was a big problem for me because I had this internal shame about it. So I wanted to like get it over as quickly as possible, but I also didn't trust my therapist.
Yeah.
Not because of anything wrong with them, but because I have trust issues, I have abandonment issues. And so therapy wasn't the thing that helped me, but it was that first step to getting me the help that I actually needed. And if like nobody helped me out of that shame cycle or like kicked me out of it with their left boot, then I would still be where I was for however long I was still living. But I think all of that really like stems from the US's history of mental health illness, because like prior to, I would say even like the 70s, like asylums and anything that would be there to quote unquote help a person was honestly worse than any disease you can imagine, between the forced lobotomies, the forced medication, and the horrid conditions that people in asylums were in for years. So even today, people have this image in their head that if you're trying to get help, like you must like really be a problem for society.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the mental health field is still like growing. Just recently they took transgenderism out of the DSM-5 as a mental health disorder.
Yeah, I actually had a conversation and said the term transgenderism on accident because I didn't think it was like any type of term at all. I thought I'd made it up, which is like even worse, to be honest. It's so cringy. The cringy things that happen that I decided to do. Oh my gosh. I did not know that it was a term. I thought that I had like thought of it. And then that person was very understanding, and they forgave me for making a stupid mistake like that. But yeah, I had no idea that, because, well, yes, I am like, at one point, I have a really interesting relationship with sexuality, you know this, but like, yes, while I did like kind of understand a little bit of it, there's so much I didn't know. And, to talk about topics that you don't know fully about, you know? So it's just like, it's better to not. But what I think is important to pull from that particular instance is that, like, I'm so grateful for that person to be so forgiving and thoughtful to allow me to have that mistake without making me feel like I had done something horribly wrong, which I did, though. I feel like I did do something horribly wrong. But that's like another thing that we're trying to do with this podcast, is to like, encourage people who may have to be on, if they're on that side of the border, right, between somebody with a mental illness or some sort of label or something that they're dealing with. If somebody says something that's that may be offensive, to be able to identify that without emoting and reacting too quickly, and to, like, if that person is trying to, if that person's not intentionally trying to harm you, perhaps listen to it and give them a better option. Give them that space to learn.
Yeah, it's most hurt feelings come from ignorance, not malice.
Yeah.
And so if you can just add that little bit of education, it keeps that from happening again in the future.
So I've had a lot of people come up to me and ask me, like, hey, is it okay for me to ask a question to you? Like, is it okay if I talk to you about bipolar disorder? I'm very curious. I'm so open to that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's only when people are making jokes about people with bipolar disorder, like, oh, like, why are you so bipolar for, like, you keep changing your mind, or like, the weather is so bipolar, like, why can't it just stay warm? Like, something like that. That's not you. That's using the word bipolar out of context, and it's not helpful to anybody. Anyway, back to shame.
But I think that's like a really important part. If we like educate the people out there who are shaming, they might not shame anymore because they know how wrong that their opinion is. And I feel like that's why we had to like even make this a topic, is because people experience so much shame. They're not getting the help that they need, and there's no reason to be ashamed of needing help. Like, you might not have a straight up mental illness, but that doesn't mean you don't need help. And if you do have a mental illness, it's nothing to be ashamed about.
So here's the thing about creating, like, continuing the conversation and contributing to this conversation around this topic, is that it's a team effort. It's a team effort. So, like, if you're somebody that identifies as atypical, or think you identify as atypical or whatever, like, have the patience to understand that some people are just plain ignorant. Like, it's just, you know, and they're like ignorant people because of the fact that they're ignorant. They don't know what the heck it is they're talking about. They're going to say something stupid, like, that may be triggering and offensive. But if that ignorant person, or where that voice is coming from, isn't malicious, and they're just saying something that is a mistake, give them that space to make that mistake, hear it, and then just correct them, right? But you can only do so much from one end. And that means on the other spectrum, if you're that person who doesn't know a whole lot about this topic, a topic of any type of label, any type of stereotype, any type of disorder, whatever it is, sexuality, anything, if you don't know anything about those topics, or don't know enough about it, don't pretend like you do.
Oh my god, that's a topic in and of itself. The like self-appointed experts that there are, like, because that's such a problem.
Don't pretend like you do, and give the people who do know something about it the space to educate you, you know. And if you say something that triggers another person, allow that person to be triggered. Just, you know, like, allow them to be triggered, because their feelings are valid. Their feelings are valid. And if you give them that space to be triggered, you may also give them the space to explain to them why it was inappropriate for you to say that thing. And that gives the room to diminish that shame that comes with having whatever it is, being in the situation. I'm trying to think of a word that accurately encompasses what I'm trying to say, because I don't want to say that it's like, it's not just a disorder, it's not just a situation, it's not just a sexuality, identity, it's not just that, it's whatever it is that might cause might be the source of a
soft spot.
Yeah, like a soft spot. Yeah, something like that. Might be the source of a soft spot or any type of trigger. You need to like allow that to feel it. What I'm trying to say is that like when we all, no matter where on this, like where in the plane of people and relationships and the people having conversations like this are, no matter what side you're on or where you're sitting on this metaphorical table of of talking about this topic, it's really important to just give people space. Like, give the person that you may have triggered space, or give the person who may have made a mistake to say something that triggered you space too, because that's what we all need, is just space to listen to and absorb where the other person's coming from. And that's kind of where I think if our efforts are more thoughtfully distributed like that, we may be able to create a more agreeable place for people to talk about things like this. I think.
Yeah, and I think that segues really nice, I think, into the last thing we should really touch on before we end this podcast, is how can you as an individual help in the stigma and help open the conversation?
And I think it's really important, like what I just said, and I hope that when we go back and we hear it again, that it makes some sort of sense, because I'm doubting myself now, is that like the metaphorical table that we're sitting at, right? Like, think about where it is you sit, and then position yourself in a way that is welcoming and compassionate and considerate of everyone else at that table.
I think that's a good way of looking at it.
Oftentimes, I feel like people are so quick to hear the story that they want to hear, or unwilling to hear any other parts of anyone else's story, and that's where the conversation just stops. Yeah, I think that's kind of the point that I was trying to make.
I think you made your point. I think for me, the biggest thing that people can do on a daily basis to help end it is to not call people triggered, to not put people down. And I know that's a big thing in my family, is like, oh, you're showing emotion, you must be triggered, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, the word triggered.
Yeah, framed just like that. It's like, as soon as you throw that out, you're just going to end the conversation. Without a conversation, we can't get anywhere with it. And I think another big thing people can do is maybe show the less glamorous side of yourself on social media, so the people around you know that they're not alone. Because isolation really is the end all be all when it comes to not wanting for help. I felt isolated. Every research article, everything that I've read out there about the topic of shame and mental health, they all say that the only way to break that cycle is to let people know that they are not isolated, they're not alone in their struggles, that nobody actually is perfect, and there's nothing wrong with being less than perfect. And so that's what I've been doing. Like, I embarrass the shit out of myself on Instagram. I really do. Like, if you ever want to feel good about yourself, go look at my Instagram feed. You're gonna feel great.
You are like, oh my god, stop. You're fine. This is just ridiculous, V. I completely agree. I think that when you mention the word triggered, I feel like people do get offended by that word, and I understand why they get offended by it. And I don't think that we should take the word triggered off the table. I think that people should be more aware of what that means to people.
Yeah.
Because like, triggered is a very real thing. Like, and I know that like our generation, or the current internet generation, likes to use the word triggered a lot as a joke.
Yes, it very much is a joke.
Which is fine. I make that joke all the time, and it's totally fine. But there's a very serious origin to where the word triggered comes from. And not gonna lie, like, there are situations where I've felt triggered by things and not known how to address it, or not been able to identify what it is that triggered me. And it's caused a lot more miscommunication in the process. So I don't think we should take the word triggered off the table. I think it should be part of a larger conversation that we should probably do an episode on at some point, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that'll be a good thing to put in the pipeline.
Yeah.
So make sure, if you're not, subscribe to us on whatever you're listening on. Check us out on Instagram.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next week to talk about holistic yoga healing.
I wouldn't use the word holistic, but yeah, it's like I did use the word holistic earlier. Bye.
All right, bye.
Want to help our show?
Consider donating to the Pull Up the Chair podcast network to keep this show and the others in our lineup going.
All donations are tax deductible.
Links with more information can be found in the description of this podcast. Hey, it's V from How's That Working For You? You need to check out our new podcast, The Cat and V Show. It's basically season 2 of the old How's That Working For You. So check us out on your favorite podcast directory. New episodes are released every Wednesday.